Do I have multiple personalities? This is a question I get oftentimes when I talk about working with parts. And this is a somewhat valid question, because when people hear about parts and about the concept of parts and the idea that we are the total sum of the different parts we have, they immediately go like, oh my God, I have multiple personalities. I knew it. There's something, you know what I mean? No, and that's not it. 99% of the population does not have multiple personalities, or as it is commonly known, dissociative identity disorder. And so let me explain what is the difference and what is common. So when working with parts, I oftentimes came across this question of, multiple personalities or dissociative identity disorder. And actually, if you'd like to study more, I strongly suggest and recommend looking out for Dr. Colin Ross. He is the world's leading expert in working with DID. He has many books that he's written, and he also has programs of his own that he's sharing with the world in working with DID for almost 40 years now. And I had a few interventions, a few conversations with him, a few interviews, and he was so kind and generous to explain that actually DID, dissociative identity disorder, is actually a spectrum. It's not like you either have it or don't have it. It's a spectrum. He was giving an example. It's kind of like, I'm drinking. Does that make me an alcoholic? Well, it depends. How much do you drink? When do you drink? What do you drink? And it's the same thing here. When we're talking about dissociative identity disorder, like I said, it's a huge spectrum. And he gave a few examples, which I'm going to relay now to you. And in one of them, he said, when you deal with somebody with DID, it's pretty much like this person does something, and then he has a certain switch, so to speak, inside of him. Let's just give an example. I'm walking through the park, and then I have a switch inside of me that goes like, oh, I should really take my clothes off. Let's just say that, okay? So there's like this strong urge, this powerful urge, but I still am able to control it. But this every now and then comes up. And so this can be a sign of DID. However, there are other situations where, for instance, which, now it goes down the spectrum. The person can do something, and then he can, let's say, hear himself say something, and then quickly he jumps in. Like, I'm talking to you, and then suddenly some other words are spurted out, or blurbed out, right? And then I'm aware of that, and then I control myself, and I try to retract what I just said. Further down the line, I am doing something, and suddenly I have a certain behavior, like my hand starts doing this. Let's just say that. My hand starts doing this. I am seeing that this is happening, but I cannot control it. I cannot control it. It's like this is happening, and my consciousness says, stop it, and the hand won't stop. This is now getting more into the weeds of working with DID. And of course, all the way down, all the way at the very end of the spectrum, like in the most advanced stages, so to speak, pathological rather, I would say, stages, are situations where the person is completely switching off from one identity to another. So let's say John goes home, he enters the house, he puts the coat in the up there, he puts the keys on the table, and then the next thing he knows, it's 3 days later, and he is, I don't know, in Paris. And he's like, how did I get here? What is happening? And this, of course, this best case scenario here. And so Johnny is like, the last thing I remember is me hanging the coat and putting the keys down. And now I'm in Paris. I don't know how I got here. I don't know anything that happened in the interim. And by the way, this is like 3 days later. So what happened? It's a complete blank. It's complete pause in his consciousness. This is, of course, one of the most extreme cases. And if you'd like to learn more about this, I recommended you watch the movie 3 Faces of Eve, which is actually a case of multiple personality, of DID, and actually Eve died a few years ago. The real Eve died a few years ago, and this movie, it was actually made from the notes of the psychotherapist who worked with her over the years to help her with her DID, right? She had, 3 different identities, so to speak. To work with DID clients or patients, you need to have, of course, a lot more experience under your belt. Working with DID is not completely different, but it is a lot more focused on the more pathological aspect than working with parts. And so I hope this is clear. Again, if you want to study more, if you want to understand better the idea of DID and parts, I strongly suggest to look up Dr. Colin Ross' work, his website, his books. He's written several books on the matter, so you'll have a lot to learn from him. And now let's move on to our next step in our training.